My family still lives like about 10 miles down Southfield Road. And, well, they used to live in the Berkeley area, Southfield area, and now they're more out to Warren. Can you hear me on this end?
Yeah. And you got sort of involved by comics, you know, when people like Stanley and Roy Thomas were coming out to this area and looking for new talent, correct?
No.
Okay, why don't you go ahead?
No, I never went to comic book conventions or anything like that. My dad worked for Chrysler, and as one of his benefits as a draftsman, he figured at the end of the day he was allowed to fill his briefcase up with as much tracing paper and pencils and masking tape as he could. He had the idea this was going to help him with his, you know, lumber handicraft work. I found that it was great for tracing off Superman and Batman in the comic books and putting them up on the wall. That sort of led me into drawing, and pretty well self-taught. Ended up going into the service, shipping out of here around '68.
Okay.
And spent a year and a half in Sicily and then a year and a half in the Pacific. And during that time I was doing drawings, and I'd send them into Marvel or DC, and they would reject them. And finally near the end, one of them said, "Oh, Herb Trimpe likes your Hulk." Okay. So I said, "Well, that's enough. Right. That's enough instigation. I'll go to New York." So I loaded up 2 suitcases, one with clothes and one with comics, and took a bus to New York City. Got off at the bus station, set the comic book suitcase down because it was heavy. And this really nice gentleman came along and grabbed it and started walking down the street with it and saying, "Here, let me help you." And he realized how heavy it was, stopped and went, "Hell with this," and he walked on laughing. You know, he was obviously planning on stealing it, but that was my introduction to New York. And I eventually got some work at Marvel. I've sold a couple of things through the mail to DC's horror books. A couple of 2-page stories that Joe Orlando bought. And I just happened to luck out because Marvel was going from like 8 books a month to like about 30. So they were literally hiring anybody who came across the state line with the whole town. And I could hold a pencil. So they hired me on and put me to work as their art director, which doesn't seem like the most sane thing for a company to do, but they never had an art director before. And I found myself working with Stan Lee on designing up covers for artists like John Buscema and Jack Kirby and all these really great artists to do the final drawings on. It was always a fun job because I'd come into Stan's office after working all morning on these sketches for like the Defenders or something like that, and he would always go, "Great, great, but..." And then he would get up on the table, he would take his glasses off and put it on the chair, and he'd get up on the desk, and he'd act out how he wanted to do this, because Stan was a frustrated actor, still is. And so we'd work out the things, and maybe about 1 out of 10 times Stan would get off the desk and go sit on his glasses. Oh. So it was one of my favorite parts of the day. So that's how I started off in Marvel, and we eventually did a love story and a horror story, and then eventually got the Iron Man job.
And that's where you introduced Thanos?
That's the one where we introduced Thanos.
And let's talk a little bit about him. I mean, he's a character that's pretty much been a big part of your career over there. What made him so compelling, and why do you think he endures today?
He was my dark side.
Okay.
I like to say that he was the best thing, and he is obviously the most popular character I ever created. So my career sort of started off here and went downhill since then. And so he was any kind of dark thing that I had floating around in my head. And he was a great outlet for it. Every time I've left Marvel and come back, it's always to do a Thanos story. It may have been inside Warlock or Captain Marvel or Silver Surfer, but it was basically Thanos I was doing. The main characters of the books were just side characters. And I sort of based a career around that guy.
And I noticed he was also a character that evolved, because when you're doing the Infinity books, he seemed to move from crazy cosmic villain to almost kind of a world-weary, wanted a life on his own.
Well, he was an anti-hero.
Right.
Very much. I mean, he was never really what you call your super villain, because basically he wanted things like power, and he he was, he was paranoia personified, basically. He wanted to be so powerful that nobody else could have any control over his life. And the several times that he has gotten that magic control, where he is completely in charge of his life,
Be careful what you wish for.
he gave it up because it wasn't what he wanted. So he's always been my sort of, watch what you wish for character.
And you also, you didn't create a Warlock, but you took him and pretty much put your own spin on him, correct?
Well, Roy Thomas had taken him, who had been a Jack Kirby's Andy creation, and then made him into Adam Warlock, which is a Jesus Christ Superstar thing.
Yeah.
And they had their run on that, and I had finished with Captain Marvel, which was taking a warrior and giving him a spiritual side. That's what Captain Marvel was about. And so I quit Marvel for a while, and then Roy said, what do you want to draw? And I went back home that night and went through a bunch of boxes of comics of the characters, and finally came up with him. But I didn't really want to do him the way he was, because he was basically where I had taken Captain Marvel. He was a spiritual creature at that point. So I said, well, what do you do with a spiritual creature? And it occurring to me that you turn him into a paranoid, schizophrenic, suicidal character. And that's what Adam Warlock eventually became. He eventually kills himself at the end of his series.
Right. And there's a lot of sort of, for lack of a better word, Robert Heinlein tend to feel like Stranger in a Strange Land. Like you said, the spiritual sort of inner.
Well, I was reading a lot of Wilhelm Reich and Freud, and so there's a lot of psychology going on there. Later on, I got into Joseph Campbell and other writers like that. But Thanos was always what I was reading, what I was thinking, and how I could put it into a story.
And another character that many people may not know that you co-created is Shang-Chi.
Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, Steve Englehart and I, who co-created it. We loved the Kung Fu TV series at the time, before it went downhill into satire. At the beginning, it was very, very nicely done, and we wanted to do that series. Except there was a Warner Brother production, and DC was owned by Warner Brothers, so Marvel couldn't do it. So we had to create our own character, and Stan had bought the rights to Fu Manchu, and so he got drafted on it before I ever read any Fu Manchu books. And so we started putting together, did the first issue with Steve. And then Larry Hama came up and went, you're doing Fu Manchu? Have you ever read any of these things? And I said, no. He said, let me get you some. And I was horrified.
Oh yeah, it's like
they're the most racist pieces of garbage you've ever seen in your life.
Yellow Peril, I believe is what they call it.
Well, I mean, that was about every other paragraph. That phrase. So I lost interest in Shang-Chi pretty quickly, so that's why I only lasted 2 issues.
And then a lot of people also may not know you pretty much did the first Marvel graphic novel, the Death of Captain Marvel.
Yes, that was a bargain I cut with Jim Shooter.
Okay.
They wanted to, the Europeans have been doing graphic novels for a long time. And I think, I'm credited with being the first one in America, but I don't think I am. I think Will Eisner did some of his stuff first beforehand.
Okay.
So the Death of Captain Marvel was a deal I cut with him because I was doing Dreadstar with the Metamorphosis Odyssey, and I wanted to continue it. And so Jim said, if you do Captain Marvel, we'll print the Dreadstar graphic novel, which was the third graphic novel that came up for him. So I started working on the Death of Captain Marvel, which was a way of working out my own father's death.
Okay.
He died of cancer.
Okay.
And I was playing a lot of volleyball at the time.
Okay.
And so right in the middle of the story, I broke a finger on my right hand. And so if you look at the Death of Captain Marvel now, you'll notice there's no long sweeping lines there. Because every morning I used to get up and I'd take a pen and I would literally tape it into my hand and ink this thing. Because the budget was already gone on ink. I had already spent the money. So I had to actually sit down and do the work. So every morning at lunch, until lunch, I had a pen taped in my hand and I would ink this thing in real short lines, break at lunch, untape, move my hands around, come back after lunch, tape it back. And so the book's got a strange look to it, and that's why.
And you've done cosmic, but you've also done street level characters. Like, two of my favorite books of yours was your collaboration with Bernie Wrightson, Batman the Cult, and the Punisher POV. you did with Marvel.
Well, the Punisher POV was supposed to be Batman the Cold sequel.
Okay.
That's a strange story all to itself. DC has always had a strange priority on how they want to do things. And Bernie and I did the Cult, and it went through the roof and said, Bernie, it was their best-selling book that year.
To this day, I still think it's one of the best Batman stories ever written.
And Bernie and I said, let's do a sequel.
Right.
And we went over to DC and said, hey, we got this big thing, we got this other story, let's do a sequel. And they said, no. And they said, we want Bernie to do Swamp Thing with Len Wein. Now, does anybody remember the Swamp Thing series that came out after you do it? Because it never actually came out.
I thought you were talking about the first one.
The first one, Bernie did, but the second, they wanted him to do a sequel with, it was going to be a 4-part miniseries. And the thing with Bernie is, I live down the road from him. And so Bernie needs encouragement, or he gets bored, and he goes off and does other things. And so nothing gets done. And so Rob Mars, who lived in the area, and I, who were the only ones who were able to get any work out of Bernie, because we would stop by once a week and go, oh, this looks great, this is great, this is great, keep doing it. And he'd get the job done. Len, who lived out in California, and Bernie lived in New York, he couldn't do that. And so he got like a half issue of Swamp Thing, and then Bernie wandered off and started drawing paper bags or something. You know, and that was the end of it. And DC still wouldn't do Batman because they said he's got to do the Swamp Thing. So we took the Batman story and we converted it over to a Punisher story, and that's what POV was all about.
And you also, with your Batman work, you also did Death in the Family, correct? Where
Killed Robin.
What was it like writing a story where you didn't know what the end was going to be until you had, you know, fans calling on the number?
Come on, I knew what my fans were like.
True.
I mean, you're a bunch of ghouls. I knew the guy was going to get killed off. I mean, we did write the thing, and it was clearly the worst thing I ever did up at DC, because the book sold well. When they first started doing it, Denny O'Neil, who was the editor, got out and said, oh, this is my idea, and he was on all these morning talk shows,
right,
and going, oh, this is terrific, and call in, vote for it. And so they voted it in, and Robin got killed. And then merchandising department up at DC suddenly realized they had all these lunch boxes, pajamas with Robin on it. And so killing off Robin had been their best-selling book that year again. All of a sudden was the worst thing they could have done. And they said, who's responsible for this?
Oh, jeez.
And everyone went, Starlin. And I was out of DC for another 10 years after that.
I remember that being at least the final chapter, a somewhat political book, because I remember there was the Ayatollah Khomeini came in, made the Joker ambassador to Iran.
Yeah, that seemed like a good idea. They hadn't put out the fatwa on Salman Rushdie yet at that point. As soon as it did, they did swat Rushdie. But our biggest worry was that Khomeini was very ill.
Okay.
And so I was afraid he was going to die before the book came out.
Right, right.
And he did perish a couple of months afterwards. So it was a real tight fit outcome.
And you've also done a lot of sci-fi work at DC recently.
I had a little fun with those characters. Adam Strange was, when I was a kid, we used to take a ride up to Torch Lake, Michigan,
Okay.
for Detroit here. And I would go off to the used comic book place. It was a beer and wine shop that sold comics for a nickel. This is a long time ago. I'm really dating myself. And Adam Strange and Captain Common and all these guys were usually what was there.
Right.
And so I would crawl back to the station wagon while we drove up, and I'd read those things. And I loved them. I loved Carmine Infantina's drawing on it. Bud Murphy's Anderson's drawing on Captain Common, even though the character itself was really bizarre and dumb. So when I came back, I had a spell doing Thanos over at Marvel that didn't work out well.
Right.
And I ran into Dan DiDio, and he said, how would you like to come over and do something for us? And what would you like to do? And you know, they had so much stuff tied up with people already, all their main characters, K-9 and all that.
Yeah.
So I said, who's really obscure that you're not doing anything? So I said,